So welcome back. So we're still in chapter 4, which is all about consciousness. We've already talked about what consciousness is and kind of all the different states, and we talked more in detail about sleep and dreaming, which is one of the states of consciousness. But now we're going to talk more about the altered states of consciousness. And we're going to start with talking about this whole idea of meditation and hypnosis that puts us into these altered states of consciousness. And then we're going to talk about altered states that come through the use of drugs. And we're going to talk about different drugs and what they do and how they work. And then what happens when we become addicted to some. But talking about meditation and hypnosis first, we're going to talk about meditation. And essentially what meditation is, because it is sometimes used in different religions, different faiths, what we mean by meditation for the sake of this class is it's narrowing one's attention, to one object, a word, a thought, or performing a repetitive ritual. And the whole idea is to put you in a more relaxed or contemplative state. And so you'll see a lot of times when people are meditating, they'll have a certain word, there'll be like repetitive music playing, there'll be someone that guides them and tells them to think about a certain motion or, to regulate your breathing and watch your breathing. But ultimately the whole idea, again, it's just to put someone in a relaxed state, and then sometimes contemplative. There's also transcendental and mindfulness meditation, and these kind of meditations are used essentially to benefit people. And the research that we've had out there on it, as it has been found to be very effective. So it helps to decrease stress, it lowers blood pressure, relieving pain, insomnia, anxiety, depression. So there's a lot of positive benefits to meditation. And again, all it's really doing is altering your consciousness just a little bit so that you are focused, you have that kind of focused awareness, but it's in a more relaxed situation. There's also physical changes that we've seen to the brain, which seem to help with improving memory as well. And so that's why, a lot of times we say, put yourself in a relaxed situation when you're studying for something, don't stress out about it, because sometimes that stress makes it harder for us to remember. Because it seems like when we're in these relaxed kind of contemplative states, it improves our memory. But that's what we mean by meditation. Again, it's kind of that focused awareness on one thing in particular to relax the body. And this is actually quite similar to hypnosis, because hypnosis, again, it's an altered state of consciousness, but it's by focused attention and decreased relaxation. You're more relaxed. So decreasing kind of your awareness of other things. It's more a focus on one thing in particular, and then causing that deep relaxation. But similar to hypnosis, it has that focused attention. And so you'll see that those that get hypnotized, a lot of times it's called like telling someone, focus on your breathing, or, I'm going to wave this clock in front of your head, focus on the clock and listen to only my voice. So it's very similar to meditation, but a lot of times with hypnosis, it's to serve a slightly different function, depending on the type. But one thing that should be mentioned about hypnosis is you have this heightened susceptibility to suggestion. All that means is when you're told certain things, when you're in this altered state of consciousness, you're more likely to go along with it. So when someone says, and you're holding your hand out and you feel this heavy weight in your hand, if you are in this altered state, in this relaxed state, not just being hypnotized, just a relaxed state, you're more likely to go along with it. Your susceptibility has been lowered. And when it comes to hypnosis, again, sometimes there's different meanings as to why people get hypnotized. There are kind of street hypnotists or stage hypnotists that do it more for entertaining reasons. And so, they bring people up on the stage, they hypnotize them and make the person think they're a chicken, and then, they're clucking around on the stage acting like they're a chicken. But other times through hypnosis, I knew an individual that got hypnotized to help them to quit smoking. Because again, it's that high susceptibility or heightened susceptibility to suggestions. Being hypnotized also can have positive benefits to to individuals. So it kind of depends on why a person is being hypnotized. But again, it's almost identical to meditation. It's just kind of more the purpose it serves and the angle that it goes at, where a lot of times with hypnosis it's guided, whereas meditation can be more of a singular person type thing. And how hypnosis works, there's two main ideas. There's the role-playing theory and then the neo-dissociation theory. The role-playing theory is more for that stage hypnotism. It's the whole idea that, people that are being hypnotized on the stage, they know what's going on. But because they're up on stage and they're being watched, and a lot of times there's other people being hypnotized as well, they're just going along with it. Because it might sound weird, but if you're up on a stage and everyone around you is, walking around acting like a chicken, you will actually stand out and feel more embarrassed if you don't play along, if you don't also act like a chicken. So the whole idea of the role-playing theory is that you're just going along with it. The person says, oh, you feel like a chicken, they say, okay, yeah, I feel like a chicken, they act like it. It's more entertaining. So it's playing a role. They want to be the good hypnotic subject. The neo-dissociation theory, though, is this whole idea that our conscious awareness kind of splits off from itself. It dissociates from itself in this new way. So a new dissociation, new way of splitting, neo-dissociation. And when they split off, there's kind of this hidden observer. And so it's kind of this idea that when you're hypnotized, you're still aware of your surroundings, because I'll say this right now, with hypnotism, because there are common misconceptions, you're always aware. But the idea is you kind of split off and you're kind of watching yourself, engaging and being hypnotized. So you're still aware, but you kind of feel this disconnection. But another thing that should be said about hypnotism, because there's this common belief that if you're hypnotized, they can make you do something you don't want to do. That's not true. The only thing a person can ever be hypnotized to do is something that they're already willing to do. So there's never any fear of being hypnotized, when someone hypnotizes you and you kill someone without knowing it. One, you're always aware in some capacity, and then two, you can't be hypnotized to do something you don't want to do. But these are kind of the two different theories as to how hypnotism works, whether it's just kind of playing along or kind of this split off of yourself where you're still aware but just kind of watching yourself. And so this slide just kind of talks a little bit more, talks about meditation and hypnosis and how they're very similar to one another. Again, repetitive stimulus or repetitive rituals, very, very similar, but then kind of what they're used for is a little different. Meditation, again, a lot of times is more in rituals, it's more kind of religious or faith-based, or just relaxation, I guess I should say, whereas hypnotism sometimes, though it is used to help, it's also sometimes used for entertainment purposes. And that's kind of all that we're going to talk about, altered states that are done kind of without the use of drugs. So it does change our awareness. Again, we're still aware, but it's been altered in some way. But now we're talking about other states of altered consciousness that are done through the use of drugs. And more important things to talk about when it comes to drugs, because ultimately how drugs affect our consciousness is going to vary by all the different types. But an important thing when talking about drugs is, of course, to talk about drug abuse, which is different from drug dependence and psychological drug dependence. So we're going to talk about all of these. And what we mean by drug abuse is you're just using it more than a person often should, essentially. So it's a drug use pattern associated with ongoing problems, whether it's social, physical, legal. So when you're going through stuff in your life, drugs should not be the answer for that. There are more healthy methods. And when people use that in a repetitive way, to deal with these sorts of issues, that's kind of seen as drug abuse. You are using drugs for a way that they are not being intended to be used. And I should be said, this is more for using it more than it should, or using illegal substances. Of course, there is medication out there to help with pain, to help with mental disorders and stuff. That's not what we mean. It's more stuff that is not being used for its intended purpose in great amounts, or again, working with these certain ongoing problems. A similar thing to this is then drug dependence. This is more serious because this is when your brain is, in a sense, rewired itself and it now has this physical dependence upon this drug, like it needs it. And this can get very serious when it comes to like alcohol dependence, because those people suffering from alcoholism, they can reach a point where when they are getting help for it, they have to be given a certain amount of alcohol, or else their body will, go into withdrawal and the person could potentially die. And so it's very serious because the body has changed where it feels this need for this drug. And it can cause a lot of serious issues. It is similar light, but still a little different. There's psychological dependence, and this is when a person feels like they need it. They might not physically need it, like the body might not have rewired itself to actually needing it, but the person feels in their head and their mind that they, need this drug to get by. So, there's some individuals out there where they say, oh, I can't relax until I've had some alcohol. That's a psychological dependence. They feel like they can't relax without the use of this drug. So that's kind of the difference between a drug dependence, the physiological dependence, versus psychological. Physiological is when the body itself feels a need to have that drug, whereas psychological is when the person mentally thinks that they need it. So we talk about alcohol a lot because, of course, this is a college-level class, and one of the biggest issues out there for college students is alcohol abuse. Which again goes back to that drug abuse, where people use alcohol a lot of times, in an ongoing, again, kind of social awkwardness or social, you feel like you need it to relax. There's the stress of school. It's a very unique and new experience. You're an adult now, you have all these new responsibilities, and so a lot of people will turn to drinking, and it can become an issue really quickly. But it is the most widely used depressant drug. We're going to come back to talking about more depressant drugs in just a little bit. But it's the most widely used one, and it is a legal one, but it is often abused, and sometimes used by people under the age, because you have to be 21, in this country at least, in order to purchase and drink alcohol. But you see that college campuses, a lot of times, because it is that first experience, and there's this whole idea of, everyone else is drinking, so I want to too, but they don't know how to pace themselves and all sorts of stuff. They engage in binge drinking, which can lead to some very serious and harmful effects on your body, and can sometimes even lead to death. This has to do with the blood alcohol content. And so I won't go over it in huge detail, since again, this is kind of more for your awareness. But it shows that as the percentage of alcohol in your body, that's what we mean by blood alcohol content, it's the amount of alcohol in your blood. As that percentage increases, you can kind of see the effects. And it does not take long, it's only, to 0.41 where you see, a slower heart rate and potentially death. That's a very small percentage. But you'll see how over time, you have this impaired alertness and judgment. You feel this kind of pleasure, but also nausea, sleepiness, emotional arousal, impaired coordination, which I talked about before when we talked about your kinesthetic and vestibular sense and how alcohol affects that kind of sense first. But you'll see, just the effects as your blood alcohol content increases. And for the most part, again, yes, there are some positive feelings to it. You get to feel more relaxed and things like that. But ultimately, in a sense, when there's healthier alternatives out there, a lot of times it's not worth it in great quantities, at least I should say. Alright, we're going to come back to talking about depressants, as I mentioned, but we're going to talk about stimulants. This is the complete opposite. What stimulants do is it's exciting your body. It's stimulating your body. It's bringing everything up, your heart rate up, your breathing rate up, everything like that. So that's what we mean by stimulants. They're also known as uppers. And some examples of these are amphetamines, caffeine, cocaine. So these are all examples of stimulants, which again, it stimulates your central nervous system, so it kind of kicks that into gear. And you'll never guess what the most commonly used and sometimes abused stimulant is. It is a legal one, and it is caffeine. It's something, again, a lot of college students can sometimes overdo. A lot of adults even overdo. There's a lot of people out there that say, I'm a monster without my coffee. I need my cup of coffee. And that's a dependence upon it. Sometimes it's just psychological. Sometimes it can be a physical dependence, where you really feel like you can't function until you've had some caffeine in your system. And it should be explained that even though it's not a dangerous drug, unless, used at huge extremes, you can get kind of this poisoning from it. It's not fun. The majority of the time, kind of the most negative effects you'll get is kind of withdrawal symptoms. So you can become addicted to it, and then if you suddenly quit drinking or, consuming caffeine, you can get really bad headaches, and you get really irritable. It's not fun. But it is a drug. It is a stimulant. Alright, another type of drug that's out there are known as hallucinogens. And essentially, the hallucinogens that are out there are illegal. But they are out there, and so it needs to be talked about. And what hallucinogens do, and you can kind of hear it in the name, is it can cause hallucinations, delusions. It messes with our perception. So if you recall from the previous chapter talking about perception, it's kind of our, the senses come in and our brain makes sense of it, like it messes with that sense, so you start seeing things, hearing things, feeling things that aren't really there. And some classic examples of these are you have LSD, marijuana, MDMA, also known as ecstasy. So all of these things really mess with our perceptions. It can be really dangerous depending on what it's laced with. It can cause a lot of addiction issues. It causes a lot of problems. And yeah, it can also alter your mood, but again, that causing hallucinations and messing with perception is that big thing to take away from hallucinogens. But if you remember hallucinogens, hallucinations, you can kind of remember which ones fall into that category. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to go back to it because we've already talked about alcohol, but alcohol is an example of a depressant. A lot of people, when they hear that, they think that alcohol is a stimulant, because a lot of times when people are under the influence, they do things they usually wouldn't do. But depressants, just like alcohol, it's lowering things. And so essentially, it's the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate is decreasing. Your blood pressure is decreasing. And it's lowering your inhibitions, which then with alcohol can sometimes make us do things we usually wouldn't. And so some other examples, because I've already kind of talked about depressants when I talked about alcohol, but some other examples are barbiturates, tranquilizers, and then something that's a growing issue, but opioids. Where again, it makes you feel better, it's taking pain away, so again, it's all about decreasing things. But ultimately it's a depressant. I mean, that's what depressant means. It means like lowering. It doesn't mean making sad, it's more a lowering when we talk about depressants. And again, there's been a lot of issues with people that are becoming addicted to depressants, whether it's alcohol or, unfortunately, there's a huge issue with opioids. But when it comes to addictions and stuff, and I'm going to go past this, but this kind of talks about, again, in more detail, different types of drugs, whether they have a physiological or psychological dependence, and then kind of some major effects and risks. So you can see those at your own time. And it talks about a few more as well. But when we talk about addiction and getting help with addiction, there are options out there. And there, I think, are some more as well. So understanding drug abuse is kind of that first step for getting help, understanding kind of what's going on and what can happen. And again, we're kind of going back to alcohol because that is a big issue for the age range that I tend to be teaching. So there are sociocultural factors. So we see age, employment status, cultural background, religion. These things can play a part in drug abuse, or just the prevalence of alcohol. You see that there is a higher rate of alcoholism of those of a lower socioeconomic status, because a lot of people use that, to help with that stress of, I don't have enough money to survive. And, that's a really dangerous, thought process to have, or a thing to be going through. And alcohol alcohol is sometimes used to take those thoughts away. There's also biological factors. We found that there's a genetic link to alcoholism. So if you have alcoholism in your family, you are far more likely to have a predisposition for becoming an alcoholic yourself. So there's a biological aspect. And then psychological factors. So again, a lot of people use drugs as a form of self-medication. Because a lot of them, they make you feel good. Like, that's why they're so addictive. Is your brain gets addicted to them because it makes you feel good. It rewards you for consuming these drugs. And so then your brain wants more of it, which is very, very dangerous. But realizing these dangers, realizing all of these different factors, is kind of that first step for getting some help. And then there is therapy out there. This is kind of where I'm going to end. So there's all sorts of drug treatments out there. There's different therapy groups, whether it's individual or it's group therapy. A very classically known one is Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there's also Narcotics Anonymous. And the whole idea is with that is that it's a group therapy session where you get to talk to people that have gone through a similar thing. And so that's really nice where, people don't feel like they're suffering alone. They feel like it's something that other people have gone through, and they get to kind of talk through and hear things that have worked for other people. But essentially the thing to take through this is it's helping to get rid of that physical dependence and psychological dependence. Again, the psychotherapy more for the psychological dependence. There's more of kind of going to hospitals, going to rehab and stuff for that physiological dependence, especially, if it's life-threatening, to go off of it, cold turkey, as it's said. So essentially, there is help out there. There's more things growing every day. There's more things now for opioid addiction. But just being aware in the first place is crucial. And understanding the different types of drugs and what they do is crucial. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, no matter how good it makes you feel, it's not worth it in the long run. And it's something that's often not talked about in as much detail as it should. But that's kind of all that we're going to be talking about for Chapter 4 and consciousness, all the different altered states and things like that. But we'll come back for Chapter 5.